To another daily devotional. Thanks for joining me today. We are in the Gospel of Matthew, and in our study for today, we're going to look at chapter 12, verses 1 through 21. So I'm hoping you will enjoy this and you'll get something out of this today as we study and we grow in God's Word together. This section of what we're going to cover today is what I would call the Sabbath controversies. They are two controversies that happen directly in relation to the Sabbath. The Sabbath was important in Judaism. It was an important law of God that the people had not only had the law that God had given, but in the Talmud, which is the rabbinical teachings, the oral traditions around which they interpreted and understood what God was meaning in the Old Testament, in the Torah. In the Talmud, there's a lot of rules that are given on how the Sabbath is to be kept. Now, this is all going to create a sense of controversy as Jesus is going to do ministry in Matthew chapter 12. Let's look at this together. It says, "At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath, and his disciples were hungry and began to pluck the heads of the grain and to eat. And when the Pharisees saw it, they said to him, 'Look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath.' But he, Jesus, said to them, 'Have you not read what David did when he was hungry, he and those who were with him? How he entered the house of God, that is the temple of God, or the tabernacle at that time, and ate the showbread, which was not lawful for him to eat, nor for those who were with him, but only for the priests.'" So here is the picture that is going on. They're walking through the grain fields, and Jesus's disciples are picking some of the grain and beginning and really eating it as they were walking. Now, this was not an illegal act that they were doing. This is not something that was against the law. It was not stealing, according to Deuteronomy chapter 23, verse 25, that the law allowed people who were traveling through a certain area to glean enough grain for a small meal in the fields in that area. The farmers were commanded to not completely harvest their crops, but to leave behind the edges for the sake of the travelers and for the sake of the poor. So they weren't doing something that was wrong. What they did was not wrong, but it was the day on which they did it that made it wrong according to the religious people of the day. The rabbis, the religious people, the Pharisees had made an elaborate list of the do's and don'ts that you could do or not do on the Sabbath, and this violated multiple items on the list. Charles Spurgeon said this about that event. And this is just an incidental note about the event. He said, "We incidentally learn from this story that the Lord and his disciples were poor, that he who fed the multitudes did not use his miraculous power to feed his own followers, but left them till they did what poor men are forced to do, and that is to supply a little stay for their stomachs." So obviously they were poor, kind of goes against the idea that Jesus is here to give you your everything that you want, to make you rich and wealthy and healthy and wise. That doesn't really fit with the context of all the ministry that Jesus did and all of the ministry that the disciples did. But in this particular case, Jesus didn't do a miracle and just provide them a pizza out in the middle of the field. He just let them eat the way that any other traveler would eat, any other poor person would eat. Now, in the eyes of the religious people, though, they were guilty of breaking the commands of the Sabbath. Now, by the way, these are not God's commands. These are commands that come out of rabbinical teaching, the oral tradition in the Talmud. And they had an extensive list of rules that you could do and not do on the Sabbath. So they were guilty of, in this little phrase, they were guilty of reaping, of threshing, of winnowing, and preparing food. All of those things you can't do on the Sabbath. So they had, in one mouthful of grain, they had violated 4 violations of the Sabbath according to the religious tradition. And at this time, many rabbis filled Jerusalem and Judaism with elaborate rituals related to the Sabbath and the observance of the laws. There were ridiculous ones that were taught. Ancient rabbis taught that a man on the Sabbath could not carry something in his right hand or in his left hand or across his chest or on his shoulder, but he could carry something with the back of his hand, with his foot, I don't know how you carry something with your foot, but whatever, with his foot, with his elbow, or in the ear. You could carry something in the ear, but you couldn't carry something in your hand. It's just insane. They could also carry something in the hem of their shirt or in the shoe or sandal. On the Sabbath, a person was forbidden to tie a knot. Now, except a woman could tie a knot in her girdle. So if a bucket of water had to be raised up from a well on the Sabbath day, you couldn't tie a knot in the rope onto the bucket to pull up the bucket. So what they would do is they would have the woman tie her girdle to the bucket and then to the rope, and then you've got it accomplished. You have skirted your way around the law. On the Sabbath day, you couldn't look in a mirror. You couldn't bend over to pick up something. You couldn't walk more than a certain number of steps. Adam Clarke, who is a Bible commentator, said the Jews were so superstitious concerning the observance of the Sabbath that in their wars with Antiochus Epiphanes and the Romans, they thought it a crime even to attempt to defend themselves on the Sabbath. When their enemies observed this, they detoured their operations until that day. And it was through this that Pompey was enabled to take Jerusalem. So can you imagine that? We can't even war on the Sabbath, so the enemies just said, okay, we'll wait until the Sabbath. We'll wait until your Sabbath, and then we'll come in and take over. Nothing you can do about it. You can't even defend yourself. That's how ridiculous they became on the Sabbath. And so the Pharisees said to Jesus, look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath. Again, they had this ridiculous idea, and the rules were far more important than the relationship with God. And that's the point of this little section. It's the religion versus relationship. There are people that are very religious but have no relationship with God. They're concerned about the do's and the don'ts. What can I do on this day? What can I not do on this day? What can I do to follow God? What can I not do to follow God? They're concerned more about the rules. They're more concerned about religion because religion is about my attempt to reach God. It is my reaching up toward God. It is my following the rules, and me following the rules makes it good enough that God will finally accept me. Well, that's an impossibility. You cannot follow the rules enough to make God accept you. We are all guilty. We have all broken the law of God. We have all done what is evil in God's sight. We have no hope. We can't keep enough rules because we are guilty because we've broken just even the simplest one. Look at the Old Testament. Look at the Ten Commandments. One of the commandments is about lying. You shall not bear a false witness. Another word for false witness is lying. Have you ever lied? If you say yes to that question, have you ever lied? You are now guilty, and there's no hope for you. And so religion is about trying to do the rules to make God be okay with me when I can't make him be okay with me because I'm guilty of the law. The relationship is about a relationship with God, the relationship with Jesus. That Jesus didn't come in order to make a bunch more rules. He came to introduce himself so that we could have relationship with him. By believing in him, we are saved. It's not of our own works and our own efforts. It's by trusting in Jesus, believing in him. He came to take upon himself all of the punishment that we deserve for breaking the rules. Now, that doesn't give you freedom to just go out and break rules now. In your heart, because you have Jesus in your heart and you have a relationship with him, now you want to keep those rules, not out of obligation, but out of love. That's the difference. It's religion versus relationship. It's rules versus relationship. The Pharisees cared about the rules. They cared about the religion. Jesus cares about the relationship. So Jesus steps in and he defends his disciples. So now Jesus is going to defend his disciples by what he had previously said. Remember what he had said previously. He said, have you not read, Pharisees, what David did when he was hungry, that he went in and he got the showbread and he began to eat the showbread, which is against everything. He broke the rules. Have you not read that? Are you not aware of that? And then Jesus says, have you not read in the law that on the Sabbath the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath because they're working in the temple on the Sabbath day? They have to, so they're going against your command on the temple to not work, or on the Sabbath to not work. They're profaning that. Yet I say to you, in this place there is one greater than the temple. He's referring to himself. But if you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would have not have condemned the guiltless. For the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. So he's talking about, again, remember what he said. He said, have you not read when David was hungry that they took the bread? Or do you not realize that the priests are breaking the Sabbath? Why are you getting after my disciples for picking some grain and eating some grain? It's like they cared about the most minute rule more than they cared about people and about relationship. David's principle, he broke it and ate. That's in 1 Samuel chapter 21. And it was an incident where David had a valid defense to eat it. It probably happened on the Sabbath. It was a case of eating. He broke what they would have commanded you cannot do on the Sabbath, but God was okay with that. The context of David's taking the bread shows it was justified for him to do it. Charles Spurgeon said this about it: to have eaten the holy bread out of profanity or bravado or levity might have involved the offender in the judgment of death. So if David had eaten it because he was profane, he was just out of his bravado or out of levity, not really caring, he did it out of just deliberate disobedience, then he would have been guilty of the judgment. But in David's case, he did it out of an urgent need and was not blameworthy. He said, there are cases like this. That's the principle. The Sabbath is a good thing. The Sabbath is a day of rest. It was given by God. It was after the creation was done, there was a day of rest. It's a good picture of life. We are to rest, to find days of rest. But the religious people cared more about the rules instead of the day of rest. He also referenced the fact that the priests were doing this on this day. The priests were profaning the Sabbath. They're working on the Sabbath in the temple. Why aren't you getting after them the way that you're getting after us? And then he sums it all up with these two incredible statements. He says, I desire mercy and not sacrifice. That's a quote out of Hosea chapter 6, verse 6. The Pharisees did not understand that God cared more about people than he did about the rules. He cared more about being merciful and less about grains in a field, less about the little minute things. That was the principle. And then Jesus says, the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. Now there's two principles that are being laid out by Jesus right here. He's laying out the principle that he is God. He is the Son of Man. That's a reference to God, a reference to Messiah. He is also greater than the temple, he said. There's one greater than the temple, so Jesus is greater. That's a shocking statement for him to say, I am greater than a temple. I am greater because I am God in the flesh. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. I am the Son of Man. I am the Lord, even Lord of the Sabbath. Now, Jesus was referring to one important point with that. Son of Man is that he is God, but he is also Lord of the Sabbath, meaning that if the Sabbath day is the day where you find your rest, it happens at the end of the week. It is the seventh day. It is from Friday sundown to Saturday sundown. It was a ritualized thing. You find your rest on that day. You put everything else aside. You rest on the Sabbath day. Jesus says, I am Lord of the Sabbath. So what was Jesus saying? He was saying this, that he is our Sabbath rest. You don't have to strive any longer. You don't have to work for it anymore. You don't have to perform. You don't have to keep a bunch of lists of rules and regulations and laws. Jesus is the thing that you rest in. He is the one that you find your rest and your relaxation in. He is our Sabbath rest, which corresponds to what he was saying in the last chapter when he was talking about coming to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest, because I am the Sabbath rest. You will find your rest in me. One last thing out of this section. Let's read the next verses. Now when Jesus had departed from there, he went into their synagogue, and behold, there was a man who had a withered hand. This is another controversy on the Sabbath. And they asked him, saying, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? And they did it so that they might accuse him. Then Jesus said to them, what man is there among you who has one sheep? If that sheep falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will not lay hold of it and lift it out? You're not going to leave your sheep in a pit just because it's the Sabbath day. You're going to go rescue it. Of how much more value then is a man than a sheep? Immensely. A man, it's not even comparison. People are of more value than anything else. Therefore, it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. Then he said to the man, stretch out your hand. And he stretched it out, and it was restored as whole as the other. Then the Pharisees were furious, and they went out and they plotted against him how they might destroy him. They wanted to kill Jesus. Why? Because, well, he showed them up. One, he didn't care about their religious rules. He cared more about the relationship. He confronted them, and they didn't like that. And he healed a man on the Sabbath, which infuriated them. To heal this man who had this problem was an act of mercy, but they didn't care about mercy. They didn't care about kindness. They didn't care about healing. They cared about their rules and their regulations. Again, rules matter. Religion matters to them more than relationship. For Jesus, relationship trumps religion any day. Relationships matter more than the rules. They were filled with rage. It says in Luke chapter 6, verse 11, they were filled with rage that he healed this man, and they plotted. They were conspiring. What can we do to get rid of him? Well, the rest of the story says this. When Jesus knew it, he withdrew from there, not because he was scared of them, not because he was worried about them. It's because he was on God's timetable, and now was not time. It will come time that Jesus will no longer remove himself, that he will face the cross head on, but he had to fulfill at the right time, in the perfect time, according to God's timing, before it was time for him to be killed. He withdrew from there. Great multitudes followed him, and he healed them all. Yet Jesus warned them not to make him known, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by Isaiah the prophet. Now, again, he warned them, don't share about me, don't make me known, because Jesus, again, it wasn't time. In the triumphal entry was the time that he was finally crowned and coronated as the king. He is going to present himself as king in the great triumphal entry, but now is not the time. That time will come. So don't make me known. Again, this is a fulfillment of Isaiah the prophet saying in Isaiah chapter 42, verses 1 through 3, Behold my servant whom I have chosen, my beloved, in whom my soul is well pleased. This is a prophecy about Jesus, about the Messiah. I will put my spirit upon him, and he will declare justice to the Gentiles. He will not quarrel nor cry out, nor will anyone hear his voice in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoking flax he will not quench. In other words, Jesus is coming for the bruised, the broken, the hurting, the worn out, the tired, the exhausted, the ones who can't keep all of the rules, who can't keep all of these Sabbath rules. I am coming for them. Jesus is coming full of mercy. He will not put out a bruised reed. He will not put out the smoking flax. He sends forth justice to victory, and in his name Gentiles will trust. Despite the rejection of the religious leaders, Jesus remains God's chosen servant. Even though there is controversy, even though they hated him, Jesus came for a purpose, to be the servant. He didn't come in majesty and glory. He will later, in his second coming, he will come as a conquering king. He will come as a warring king. He will come to set the world in order, to bring about his millennial reign. That will happen. Jesus will he will come with that. But at this time, this is not who Jesus is. He has come as the servant Messiah, the one who is humble, the one who is healing, the one who is bringing restoration to the people that need it the most. You know who needs that the most? We need that the most. For some of you, you have been beat up by religion. You have been beat up by the rules. You have been in situations and systems where you felt like, I'm not good enough. I can never be good enough. I can never do it. Jesus came along to be the relationship that you needed. He came to be the Sabbath rest, that you can finally find rest, that you can quit your striving and quit your performing and just rest in him. He came to be the chosen servant of God, the humble servant who would bring hope and freedom to all who desperately need it, including you and I. I hope that that means something to you. And I hope that that makes you grateful in your heart to realize that Jesus came for you, that you don't have to earn it, that you can't work hard enough to even possibly get it. Other places are trying to earn their way to God. We can't. We have to trust in Him as the humble servant, rejected by the religious, but accepted by those who desperately need Him the most. He is the hope. He is the only hope that we could possibly have. Well, I hope that you got something out of today and that you'll join me back here tomorrow as we get back into Matthew chapter 12. And we'll pick it up tomorrow in verse 22 and get through the end of Matthew chapter 12. Join me back here again then. We'll see you next time.